Welcome everyone to another live stream. It's your host Danny Dhaiphong, and as you can see, I am joined by rapper, journalist, prolific, anti-imperialist, revolutionary activist, Lowkey from the UK. Lowkey, how are you doing this evening? Morning. Good
I'm
morning,
fine,
actually, for you.
I'm fine. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for having me. It's always great to be with you.
Great. We have Lowkey's Twitter in the video description. It is actually midnight plus now where he is, so he's very generous to come on here and talk about something that is very important. So we're going to get started. Everyone hit that like button. Make sure you do that because that boosts the stream in the algorithm. Share it. Of course, support the channel in any way that you can in the video description. But we are going to get right started. Okay, Lowkey. So you brought something to my attention, which is very critical. I'm actually going to pull it up now. There is an intense operation led by the United Kingdom where pro-Palestinian influencers are being accused of being manipulated by Russia and China. You have been named specifically in this operation, but these are senior government figures. This is intelligence. It is, by all accounts, an operation. So I'm just going to read a little bit here. It says Russia and China are manipulating public opinion in Britain by promoting online pro-Palestinian influencers to stoke division, White House sources believe. Senior government figures fear rogue states, Russia and China, are promoting polarizing online narratives about the Israel-Hamas conflict. So it's clear, says one of the government sources, foreign states are engaged in trying to manipulate public opinion by skewing the way we interact online. They hope to destabilize and undermine our institutions. So we're going to go down now where they target you specifically, because I definitely want to hear your take on this. But here they talk about rapper Lowkey was found to have 11% fake profiles on X. They talk about your followers. They talk about your posts on October 7th to believe the arrogance to believe you can trap 2 million people in an open air prison indefinitely, that Israel is not a country and has been deliberately starving Gazans. So Lowkey, talk about this operation, because you've been on this show before to kind of blow the lid off of the UK's role in this Gaza genocide and in Israel's genocidal war in Gaza and the region at large. But this is a direct attack by government figures, ostensibly intelligence and military figures. That's usually what I assume when there is kind of anonymous sources happening. So talk about this operation, what's going on, and why are you the target of it? You're muted. Sorry, Lowkey.
Sorry about that. My bad, Danny.
Sorry.
All of this is part of a wider push to try and obfuscate the massive industrial scale killing which is happening in Gaza and the popular reaction to it, which is accumulatively over the period of these 7 to 8 months, millions of people in the street. It's tens, if not over 100 direct action operations against Israeli arms sites or companies that deal with Israeli arms in this country. It is a pushback against young people in university who are setting up encampments. And it's a way for them to try and explain away what has happened. But it's also part of a wider crack which is developing in the relations between Israel and China and Russia. So really, to start with, it's important that people are aware that when the Iranians launched the Operation Al-Wa'd al-Sadiq, as it was known, which was the unprecedented move of striking Israel with ballistic missiles and striking Israel with drones. This took place with missile guiding systems that were using Bidu, which is a Chinese company, and GLONASS, which is a Russian company, meaning that the satellite systems that were being used for this unprecedented strike on Israel were both China and Russia. Now, these are major global powers, and Israel is extremely unhappy about that. When we also look at the Russian role in Israel's perception in October 7th, you have the information coming out from Palestinian resistance factions that actually they were granted the licenses to produce Kalashnikov bullets locally in Gaza by the Russian government. Now, from the Russian perspective, it's likely that that would be a response to Israel siphoning small Tavor rifles to the Azov battalion in Ukraine. Obviously, that preceded the granting of licenses by Russia to the Palestinian resistance factions. What also took place was the figures from Hamas talking about the Russians saying to them that they wanted to teach the Tawfan al-Aqsa operation in Russian military schools not long after it had happened. And then you saw the response from that was Israel in November of last year start to apply some of the sanctions that the United States has been encouraging the rest of the world to apply on Russia. And so you see a real crack in the relationship between Russia and Israel. But then you have the Chinese aspect of this. Now, of course, China has the comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran and the projected investment of over $400 billion in Iran over the next 2 decades. What you also have is, according to the Israelis, China operating an informal sanction regime on Israel by no longer exporting to Israel the dual-use civil military exports. So Israel have been looking at it and saying, why are we not receiving these exports from China that we usually would that could also be used for military equipment? What we also know is that when Israel cancelled the working permits of all Palestinians working inside it, just so you get a conception of what we're talking about, 60,000 construction workers within the entity of Israel were Palestinian construction workers. They had their permits to work there cancelled straight away after October 7th. So then Israel looked to China to try and fill the gap in the construction industry. But what did they find? Not only did China not allow workers to go and work in Israel during this period, but pre-October 7th, there were 30,000 Chinese workers within Israel. Post-October 7th, at least 20,000 of them have left and not come back. In addition to that, you also have seen China not condemn the Palestinian resistance factions for carrying out the October 7th attack. And then that in some way has led to a situation where you have the relationship between Israel and China has become more strained, with particularly a lot revolving around the Israeli port of Haifa, which China had invested so much in building up. Now, Israel has decided to allow 70% of the control to fall to an Indian billionaire rather than the Chinese companies that were working there. And of course, that is a real issue. We also know that China has condemned Israeli settlement building, and it sought to bar its citizens from involvement in doing that. So what you're seeing developing, especially when you look at the relationship with Iran and the way that that led to even the resistance in Yemen being able to assert itself in the way it has, that is thanks to China and Iran working out a way for Iran and Saudi Arabia to mend bridges. And that's an amazing, when you think about the extent of human loss and human suffering that the war in Yemen, the Saudi, British, US, and Gulf War on Yemen incurred, you have a massive service to humanity being served. But more importantly than that, you have resistance factions in the region being able to have the space to operate and resist Israel. So on that side, you have Israel militating alongside with the war lobby in the United States against TikTok and it being wrapped up in a lot of the war propaganda against China. You also have to remember in TikTok, in the case of TikTok, all of the data which TikTok gathers in the United States goes directly to a US company by the name of Oracle. Now, this company, Oracle, is headed and founded by Larry Ellison, one of the richest men in the world. Now, Larry Ellison is also the largest donor to the Friends of the IDF in the history of that company's existence. He also loaned Elon Musk $1 billion with which to buy Twitter. Larry Ellison is so close to the Israelis that he actually offered Benjamin Netanyahu the directorship of this company, Oracle, which seizes all of the data that TikTok, accumulates in the United States. So actually, this idea that China is somehow manipulating public opinion to support Palestinians is just simply not true. That China is somehow using TikTok for purposes of espionage is not true. You have so many of the US key classified databases that the military relies on that goes straight to Oracle. If anything, the United States should be asking the question, and politicians there should be asking, is our data safe with a company where the head of it has not only funded the Israeli military, but also offered the position of director to Benjamin Netanyahu. But on top of that, Safra Katz, who's the current CEO of Oracle, went on record as saying that our company are committed to Israel. These are her exact words. And if our employees have a problem with it, they can find another company to work for. And you have even seen employees of Oracle resign because of the closeness of Larry Ellison to Israel. So here then we get to this point about the Daily Telegraph and their frankly bizarre, outlandish conspiracy theory that actually Russia and China are working to boost my account and others like mine in order to manipulate public opinion towards pro-Palestinian conclusions. Now, the Daily Telegraph historically is one of the closest newspapers, right-wing newspapers, to the British intelligence agencies, even so far as the first Director General of the MI5, that's Britain's internal intelligence agency, Vernon Kell, was actually a Daily Telegraph reporter based in Southeast Asia, interestingly. Now, when we look even further at this picture, we also know that the Daily Telegraph, I would say, is probably the closest also to the Israeli intelligence agencies when you consider that when Israel wanted to send a message to Britain and say that they would drop their cooperation on an intelligence level with Britain if Jeremy Corbyn was elected, where was the newspaper that scoop was given to? It was given to the Daily Telegraph. Now, in this case of this alleged story about myself and others, the article's claim is that 11% of the accounts that interact with mine are actually fake accounts. Now, numerous studies have found that the average fake follow account on Twitter is around 40%. So that's for large accounts. Around 42% of their followers are deemed to be fake. Now, that actually shows that in my case, that 11% is not for people that are following me. That is for people that actually engage with my account. So it's far below average. But the important thing here is that the company that was able to deduce this information supposedly goes by the name of Cyabra. Now, Cyabra, which the Daily Telegraph did not state in the article, is an Israeli social threat intelligence company. Now, this company is so close to the Israeli military that 3 of the founders of Cyabra are veterans of the Israeli occupation forces cyber units. At least 40 of the firm's employees are reserves in the Israeli military who were called up to fight in Gaza. Cyabra is in fact so close to the Israeli occupation forces that the CEO, Dan Brahmi, a former combat instructor for the Israeli military, gave a talk recently with the office of the Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson's unit titled On Alert with the IDF. So what you have here is the anatomy of spreading false information in order to give people a perception which is very far from reality. It is about projecting the all of the energy that people have. You know, people are naturally against seeing videos of human beings being murdered in the most horrific ways. It's not me, and it's not anyone else, and it's not fake Twitter accounts that are creating that perception. Actually, it's Israeli soldiers who have been incentivized to upload videos on TikTok. You have units within the Israeli military that are based on encouraging the Israeli military personnel to post online, particularly on TikTok, to try and humanize and beautify the image of this genocidal machine, which is bearing down on the people of Gaza. So yeah, we are a small piece of a much wider picture, but it's significant to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. Lowkey, could you talk about in the piece you mentioned Civitas, you mentioned Robert Clark was the senior fellow that commented on this. You mentioned that firm. There's also this larger Defending Democracy task force. Could you talk about that? It seems like a consortium of intelligence, political, military officials, and they're dedicated to, it says, dedicated to protecting democratic integrity in the UK from threats of interference by nations such as Russia and China. I just find it so interesting that we saw this with the proxy war in Ukraine, with NATO's proxy war in Ukraine, this kind of thing happening. Now Russia and China are being dragged into the narrative about Gaza and how Israel's losing the narrative. So could you talk about this Defending Democracy task force? Like what is that? Who's in it? If you know anything about it?
So Defending Democracy Task Force is this grouping which is headed by Tom Tugendhat, who himself is somebody that has very close relationship with the Israeli, the Israel lobby, and of course he oversees MI5. Now, Tom Tugendhat has pushed through this national security bill, which has different ways within it to squash the freedom of media to operate in a critical way around what the British security services are doing, and it limits people's ability to publish information about that. Now, it's my belief that the Defending Democracy Task Force will have some connection to the Integrity Initiative, and or at least those who were involved in the Integrity Initiative. Now, I'm not sure if you remember, this was a grouping that came out of the Institute for Statecraft, which was a think tank based around pushing for individuals and politicians within Europe who could adopt anti-Russian positions. And so you saw exertions of power from the Integrity Initiative, which at that time it was a grouping of Western journalists who would coordinate the type of information they would talk about in order to put pressure on governments. And so in one case, you had the head of intelligence in Spain was about to be selected, and there was an individual that it was deemed by these essentially British spooks would be somebody that would not be trustworthy to toe the line on Russia. And so they, through a cluster, were able to produce talking points that would be repeated by many of them to push against the selection of this individual as the head of Spanish intelligence. And they were successful actually in that smear campaign. And so my reading of this Defending Democracy Task Force is that it is an extension of that, and it's a way for the kind of silent war to play out and for the war of information to be extended. And I think, of course, this report, which, you know, you can barely call it a report. There's an anonymous source stating that they think China and Russia are doing something. There's then an Israeli intelligence company that claims that it has found this about mine and several other accounts. And then it's used, there's no causal connection between what a Whitehall source is claiming is happening and then what they're claiming happens with my account. And so the reader is then led to draw the conclusion that there's a relationship between those two things. But no doubt this will go into a larger body of work that will be used to justify this kind of mysterious institutions operations, and of course they'll push for different forms of legislation to try and really assert full spectrum dominance in the informational sphere.
Well, I think what's happening in Gaza, what Israel has been doing to Gaza with US, UK, and Western help has, I think, raised a lot of concerns by many more people maybe than ever before about Israel's influence over governments like the UK's. I mean, even here, I always pay attention to not just what is inside of a report, but also how a report is constructed. And at the very end, you have Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amici Chikli, say that British authorities, quote, need to be far more active, far more aggressive against these enemies, which threaten not just the Jewish community, but the way of life and basic values of Britain as a democratic state. With another government spokesperson in the UK saying, defending our democratic processes is an absolute priority, and we will continue calling out malicious activity that poses a threat to our institutions and values. I mean, it almost ends with an Israeli demand and an affirmation that the UK will follow an Israeli. I mean, your reaction to what could occur now from this kind of mandate that this consortium of military intelligence operatives are kind of pushing forward?
Well, I think ultimately on the personal level, there will be some form of lobbying happening, whereby social media companies are being sent certain reports that could lead them to agree with these individuals and maybe would push down an account like mine. Just so we can get a further idea of how threatened the British government is, unfortunately, by things that I am writing on Twitter. You had recently a Muslim network within the civil service actually suspended from operations because they had been working on ways to help Gaza, but also, and this is cited in the Times article, they had exchanged anecdotes about a lecture I had given. So that was seen as one of the reasons that the Muslim network within the British civil service was suspended. In addition to that, you also have this Woolney report. And I think it's important we do touch on that. You know, Jonathan Woodcock was somebody who was a member of the Labour Party. He was the head of the Labour Friends of Israel. And he was in a situation where he was accused of sexual harassment by an aide while he was in the Labour Party. Now, rather than wait out the investigation into his conduct to be carried out by the Labour Party, he used it as an opportunity to bash Jeremy Corbyn and left, claiming that the investigation was biased against him. So therefore, he escaped any type of scrutiny about the alleged sexual harassment that he carried out, according to this woman who worked for him. And then Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister, selected him to enter the House of Lords. Now, the House of Lords is a permanent for life seat where people are able to work on the legislation of the British state. Now, Woodcock then became Lord Woolney. Now, once he became Lord Woolney, he was tasked several years ago by the British government with preparing a report of over 100,000 words as the independent, quote unquote, independent advisor to the government on political disruption and extremism. And so now he has produced this report, and you have to remember that he not only was the head of the Labour Friends of Israel, he's also accepted funding from Israel lobby groups even as recently as January. He also traveled to Palestine on a trip funded by the Israeli government, where he planted trees with Israel's largest settlement building organization, the JNF. But also importantly, he is the chair of something called the Defense Purpose Coalition, which is a lobbying group that is paid by an arms company called Leonardo to lobby on its behalf. Now, he prepared this report looking at so-called extremist groups within this country. He mentioned in his report Palestine Action 103 times. He mentioned me 3 times. He alleged in his report that my music on occasion is a form of apologism for terrorism. He claimed that my song Long Live Palestine demonstrates anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And he's also calling for the banning of Palestine Action. He's listed 40 recommendations, some of which are just truly astounding in their suggestions, and also dystopian in terms of what they would mean for democratic life in this country. So all of this is part of a wider push towards a more fascistic society, a narrowing of the political potential within the society, and the silencing of voices like mine who are critical of what the unaccountable parts of the state do.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when I was in Vietnam at the time, where October 7th, post October 7th, I think it was like October 11th, 12th, 13th, and it was, Israel was full steam ahead in its horrific bombing campaign, in its genocide. And I remember Palestine Action on X. I would try to follow Palestine Action, and every time I would try to follow, I would be unfollowed. I'd be unfollowed, and of course, I think Palestine Action was trending at that time because Twitter X was literally preventing people from following it. So yeah, this goes really deep, and we definitely. I mean, that's why it's so important that we all elevate each other and ensure that we all have platforms where we can go, because the censorship is going to get more intense. And Lowkey, you've been dealing with this for many years. Maybe we can transition to the overall resistance, the situation. We had the death of Ibrahim Raisi of Iran. That has led to a lot of questions about what's next for the axis of resistance, given that Iran is such a focal point for it. But there's just so many things going on, from Al-Qassam and the Palestinian resistance, really valiantly fighting back against Israel's onslaught from north to south, as they keep talking about north and south. There's fighting happening everywhere. There's fighting happening in Jabalia. Israel's committing massacres in the West Bank and Jenin. And then, of course, you have, I think, Hezbollah launched the first airstrike on Israeli territory since 1973, using a drone that I don't think anyone had known that Hezbollah had possession of. So talk about the state of the resistance right now, given Raisi's death. I know that you wanted to talk about this, and maybe we can just frame it in the context of what is a huge fight back to what Israel is doing in this part of the world, in West Asia.
Well, I think to start with, you need to look at the centrality of Iran within what is the resistance axis. You have the axis of resistance in the region, and you have the axis of assistance in the region. So the axis of assistance is those states that are helping Israel both publicly and privately. They are the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, for example, who work together with the Israeli Ministry of Transportation to directly circumvent the blockade that the Yemeni armed forces had imposed on Israel in the Red Sea by taking in goods through the UAE, going to Saudi Arabia, and then going through to Jordan, where they are then delivered to Israel. And then you have on the other side the axis of resistance, which is, of course, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iran, and Palestine as well. But when you look at the centrality of Iran to that, for example, if you examine interviews with the highest ranking key figures like Talal Naji from Jabha Sha'biya al-Tahrir Palestine, the PFLP, he's very clear you would not have the axis of resistance without Iran. He's very clear that across the years, the decades, Iran has supported these organizations with whatever they want. You look at Jihad al-Islami, for example, Ziad Nakhala, the head of that organization, he stated, and this is quite a significant pronouncement, that Iran has given at least $3 billion to Palestinian resistance factions over the decades. Now, that is the reason that the United States and Israel is so animated vis-a-vis Iran. It has nothing to do with domestic policy, everything to do with foreign policy. It has everything to do with the conception of Palestine, Al-Aqsa and Al-Quds, as part of the thawabit of the mainstay, the key aspects of the Islamic revolution in Iran. Now, when you look at Ibrahim Raisi and the role that he has played, he moved Iran away from the illusions of the negotiations with the United States and worked towards trying to neutralize the sanctions that had been thrust on Iran by the Trump government and then followed on by the Biden government. You know, you saw the human cost of these sanctions, massive. People who would usually be getting access to medicines that they needed, just not getting that access. You had the prices of things increasing exponentially. You had even the type of sanctions that Trump thrusted upon Iran punished those who traded, who bought Iranian oil. So what Raisi was able to do was join BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Iran was developed. And this was a way for Iran to emerge from the embers of these horrific sanctions that the United States was trying to impose upon them. And it was under Ibrahim Raisi that Iran obviously came back together with Saudi Arabia, which was a major achievement, we can say. But I think it's noteworthy, actually, that the last meeting of the Iranian president and foreign minister was with the president of Azerbaijan, because Israel has cultivated Azerbaijan as an intelligence base over the last years. It has an airfield there. It also has an agreement to develop 2 new surveillance satellites from Azerbaijan. Now, all of that is about targeting Iran. And Israel accounts for almost 70% of Azerbaijan's significant weapons imports. That's billions of dollars worth of ballistic missiles, of air defense systems, of kamikaze drones. All of that necessitates an increasing integration of military operations between Azerbaijan and Israel. At least 40% of Israel's oil is supplied by Azerbaijan via a pipeline that runs through Turkey. Now, 1 month into the Gaza genocide, a joint venture between Azerbaijan's state oil company and Israel's natural gas lines company was signed to export gas to Israel. As Israel's #1 customer for arms, Azerbaijan is more deeply embedded as a military system with Israel than anywhere else in the world. So I do think that questions should be asked about what exactly happened with the helicopter. We do know that the 2 other helicopters, there was Ibrahim Raisi's chief of staff gave an interview recently in which he said, Yes, there was a lot of mist lower down towards the mountains, but the point when the helicopter that Ibrahim Raisi was in took a fall, it seems, and disappeared, there wasn't any mist right in front of them. This is according to his chief of staff, who was in one of the other helicopters. Now, when we look at the actual helicopter that was being used to transport the president and his delegation, it was a Canadian manufactured Huey Bell 212. Now, the maximum pressure sanctions that were imposed on Iran meant that the country would have far greater difficulty accessing spare parts for the Bell 212 helicopter. So while there would be wear and tear over time, they would not be able to replace those parts, and even general maintenance could not be kept up with for that helicopter. Now, this particular 212 helicopter was actually suspended by Canadian aviation authorities in 2021, along with 3 other types of Bell helicopters, when crash investigators discovered that the helicopter actually carried defective parts. So what we have is, in one way or another, the US sanctions having a role in the death of these politicians. Also, we know that the Mi-171 helicopter, which is Russian made, which was used several other times by Ibrahim Raisi, was something that Iran had complete access to in terms of maintenance, in terms of spare parts, because Russia does not go along with these US sanctions against Iran. So the question needs to be asked why that helicopter would not have been taken, and why the other helicopter, which clearly was a bit more questionable, how did these things happen? So one way or another, we can say that US sanctions certainly had a role in the death of Ibrahim Raisi. But in terms of what is known as the resistance axis, it's far deeper than 2 prominent politicians. As I mentioned earlier, you are talking about at least 3 decades of the building up of this machine across the region, which can act as one, and is really today establishing clarity in the region. Who are the people that are fighting and dying for Palestine, and who are the people that are holding bikini competitions and boxing matches and buying football teams? And that's a clarity for people in the region to really look to and say, well, when our brothers and sisters are suffering and being killed in Palestine, there's really only one state power that has materially supported the Palestinian right to resist. According to UN Resolution 3246, the Palestinians have the right to armed resistance against foreign occupation. There is only one state power that has consistently, for these 3 decades, materially supported that right. And I think it's important that people have clarity about that vis-a-vis Palestine.
Oh, for sure. I mean, everything you brought up is just so important. I understand the hesitation of speculation and of driving, kind of the narrative to, well, did Israel do it? But at the same time, everything you said about Azerbaijan is 100% true. And then also bringing up again under Raisi, this Operation True Promise, there was not really, with how unhinged, I mean, Israel is kind of unhinged, coming apart almost at the hinges in terms of its ability to control itself in the region, just given how far it has gone and how strong the resistance has become. And Operation True Promise was a huge. I mean, again, I was away. It was really disappointing. I couldn't really cover. I was away. I was, in China, just like watching, like what is going on. This is historic because Iran broke Israel's defenses, air defenses, and made a huge statement. Not just, people think it's just okay, it was retaliation for what happened in Syria. For sure, it was definitely a retaliation for that. But everything Iran does in preparation for defending itself from Israeli aggression also has Palestine in mind. So it's also a pretty huge message that not just Iran, but the rest of the resistance axis can respond to Israel. And I wanted your comment on, I've been seeing more and more written on a war of attrition by the resistance axis. We often hear Russia fighting a war of attrition with Ukraine, with NATO. Talk about this idea of, because some, I think for those of us on the outside, we think, the resistance is very strong. When is there going to be this bigger clash? But at the same time, now there's much more conversation about, I see it all the time on Al Mayadeen and other sources talking about war of attrition. So talk about that, like how the axis of resistance is fighting this kind of very kinetic, very hot conflict with Israel in defense of Palestine.
So, Harb Istinzaf is the name in Arabic. Istinzaf, the root of the word in Arabic is nazafa, nazif, which is to bleed. So it's to bleed the enemy over a long period of time. And in the case of, for instance, the Northern Front with southern Lebanon, you have a situation where there's over 150,000 Israelis who are not in their homes. Some of them are in hotels, some of them are in hostels, and they've been there since October because of the fire coming from the Lebanese front. And even you have set up a camp within Israel for displaced, the word in Arabic is nazahin, internally displaced people. These are quite unprecedented events. And I think it speaks to that side of the question. You also need to look at Israel's need to bring in Ecuadorian workers, to bring in Indian laborers, to fill in the gap within the traditional economy that has been left by reserves who have been called up to fight in the Israeli military. You also have a situation where Israel has relied partly on mercenaries from other countries. So you have, for instance, Forward Observations Group, which is a US mercenary organization that was fighting in Ukraine with the Azov battalion that now is fighting in Gaza with the Israeli military. You have several different Israeli programs that absorb individuals who are not Israeli citizens into the Israeli military. So these are what they call lone soldiers. There's usually at least 7,000 lone soldiers within the Israeli military. They are not Israeli citizens, and they enter through programs like Sar-El, like Mahal. The Massa Journeys program sends them in to sometimes join Tazabur, Garin Tazabur, which is another Israeli organization. In some cases, they have them going for up to 18 months in the Israeli military, fighting for Israel. They don't have to be Jewish, and they are not Israeli citizens. Sometimes it's a gateway for people to claim citizenship. But, my point is that there's so many ways in which life as usual has been interrupted for this apartheid, daily apartheid. You also, of course, have a situation where the economy has faced losses never before seen. You have the key gas field shut down, costing Israel millions every day. So all of these things are affecting people. But then on the other side of it, it's the idea that at some point war with Lebanon is a must. And there is the thought that exists within particular circles within the Zionist movement that what they need is a world war, and to push for the war with Lebanon, they would need direct US involvement. Of course, the US has been directly involved in Gaza. We know that from the information which is publicly available, but in an even more visible way, Israel could not fight Lebanon on its own. And I think that they view it as an existential necessity to bring down Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that will be a far, far tougher nut to crack than Gaza, which already it's apparent on a day-to-day basis, on a street-to-street basis, Israel cannot subjugate in the way that it perhaps thought it could. So we are in for many years of war ahead of us. And of course, you have the other considered necessity of the Zionist movement, which is the bringing down of Al-Aqsa and the replacing of it with a temple. And all of those attempts and fantastical and maximalist aims will be met with strong resistance all over the world, not only in Palestine.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I've been bringing up Vietnam, the history of that just bloody, gruesome war, which could be seen as a 20+ year war. The United States was involved in, if you include the early aid to the, befallen French colonial regime around 1954-55. So you had 20 years of involvement, 10 years of maximal involvement, almost maybe the equivalent of what Israel is doing in Gaza now. That's 10 years. And the reason why it was 10 years is because Vietnam's resistance was too strong to defeat, and the United States had absolutely no ability to do so. They thought they could napalm the entire area. They could poison the entire area, the entire country. None of that actually served to be helpful. And I've been in the Cu Chi tunnels in Vietnam. And when I was in there, I was like, wow, this is the Palestinian resistance. They're doing the same. They're doing a very similar thing. It's incredible. But as you said, this is going to last for really, really long time, because it was almost like this explosion from something that's been, ready to ignite for many years. How do you see this going forward, like this relationship between this like ongoing resistance and Israel's, of course, intransigence, not pulling back, actually continuing to just move up and down the Gaza Strip, in this just genocidal campaign?
I think one thing which is particularly noteworthy when you compare the conditions of Vietnam to the conditions of Gaza is when you look at the gap between the technological prowess of the United States at that time and the Vietnamese resistance. It was wide, but it wasn't as wide as we're talking about now. Israel has been able to focus so much resource and energy on developing the technological means to kill people in all manner of sophisticated ways. Now, previously, the Nakba of 1948, as you know, a video came out today of an Israeli soldier saying to a Palestinian shepherd, he was saying to him, the Nakba of 1948 is nothing compared to the Nakba of this year and next year. And this is really, I call it the big tech Nakba, because what you have is Israel previously having a kill net which consisted of whoever it wanted, women, children, men, civilians, school children, journalists, ambulance drivers. Now what Israel is trying to do is use artificial intelligence program by the name of Lavender and others to widen its kill net as far as possible. But there has been a question about how it's going about that, because one of the programs actually analyzes people according to groups they are in WhatsApp. You know, you had nothing like that level of sophistication at the time of the war in Vietnam. But this question has then brought up a lot of inquiries about whether WhatsApp is knowingly sharing the information with the Israeli military. Now, WhatsApp supposedly protects our communications, right? But historically, this would not be the first time that WhatsApp is closely linked to Israel, even prior to it becoming the property of Meta. So the founder of WhatsApp, Jan Koum, who was also a board member of Meta before it procured WhatsApp, has pumped millions of dollars into the Israeli settler clan David and the Israel lobby group AIPAC. Now, the ironic thing about David is David actually, one of the places that it settles and displaces people is Sheikh Jarrah, which is the neighborhood of Muhammad al-Kurd and his sister Mona al-Kurd. Now, Instagram is owned by Meta, which also owns WhatsApp. So there's the kind of delicious irony of it that the founder of this company is so invested in displacing people who later became massively well known through Instagram. But also it's important to note that an outgrowth of the Israeli military intelligence unit 8200 played a very key role in Meta procuring WhatsApp in the first place. So Meta purchased this Israeli mobile web analytics company called Onavo. Now, Onavo was founded by Guy Rosen and Roy Tiger, both veterans of the Israeli military intelligence unit 8200 in 2013. Now, Onavo acted as a spyware, hacking Facebook users' phones and monitoring their habits in using WhatsApp. It was found that the information gained via this spying informed Meta's decision to actually buy WhatsApp in the first place. Now, the scandal around this forced Meta to shut down Onavo. However, its founder, Guy Rosen, actually went on to become the chief information security officer at Meta, who is leaned on heavily by Mark Zuckerberg. So now Mark Zuckerberg, there's a serious question here. The Meta founder and CEO has also funded the controversial Israeli group Zaka, which was the source for the now discredited 40 beheaded babies lie about October 7th. Now, Zaka also includes on its board Stuart Seldowitz, the former Obama and Bush advisor, who was filmed on the streets of New York, racially abusing a food vendor from Egypt. Now, during this genocide in Gaza, you've seen pro-Palestinian users of Meta platforms constantly complaining of shadow banning. Yeah. Now, the former Israeli government censor and Unit 8200 veteran, Emi Palmer, is actually on the content moderating oversight board of Meta. And actually, over the last 6 months of Israel's Gaza genocide, there have been paid advertisements on Facebook telling Palestinians to leave their ancestral home and move to Jordan. It's even been found that Facebook allowed paid advertisements calling for violence against Palestinians, including what they called a Holocaust for Palestinians. Now, who is the global advertising chief at Facebook? It's none other than Nicola Mendelsohn, the wife of Jonathan Mendelsohn, the former head of Labour Friends of Israel, and both of them close friends of Piers Morgan. Now, Nicola Mendelsohn has actually even spoken at Israeli government-supported events in Tel Aviv and met with Shimon Peres when she was opening Facebook sites in the Zionist entity. What we also know is that Meta as a platform has regularly suspended the massive Eye on Palestine account. And also, it at one point was found to be auto-translating user bios that included the word Palestinians to Palestinian terrorists are fighting for their freedom in English. What we also know is that there's a huge number of former Israeli military intelligence Unit 8200 agents working for the company Meta, which of course owns WhatsApp. And even one individual that was found working for both Meta and Unit 8200 simultaneously. His name was Yonatan Ramot. But so what we're talking about here is a kind of integration of some of the most powerful companies in the world. When you look at a company like Meta, is ostensibly it has access to the information and the most private data of more individuals than any government in the world. It traverses the nation state. It traverses borders in what it has. Now, since 2012, numerous Israeli companies have been set up by alumni of Unit 8200 in Israeli military intelligence, and they have insinuated themselves into the architecture of different states. But what seems to be clear is that they've insinuated themselves into Meta. And when you have the question here of whether WhatsApp, which is a Meta subsidiary is sharing information with the Israeli military to help target Palestinians more effectively in Gaza, then you're really touching on a far more wide-ranging, essentially, conspiracy against Palestinian life. And I think all of this, when the history books are written, it will look at the big tech aspect of this war and genocide against the Palestinians in a way that differs from previous quote unquote counter insurgencies.
Yeah, I mean, in your earlier points about the technological, just vast technological gap between Palestinian resistance and those they are resisting Israel and their U.S. And Western backers, it is bigger. It is much bigger. You know, this with the Soviet Union, especially helping Vietnam, just the ways in which the Palestinian resistance has been able to not just survive but to grow and to make real progress is it's astounding, especially and in an hate to use these terms, but it is an urban guerrilla warfare environment as well. It is not the same as in Vietnam, massive countryside, massive. It's why the U.S. had to bomb or tried to bomb all the trees down because they thought that would expose the guerrilla forces. But you have Palestinians fighting literally in rubble, but fighting in so-called urban terrain. It's incredible. And then everything that you said about Meta and the use of these massive conglomerates, social media conglomerates as tools of war, it just continues to escalate and to worsen. But Lowkey, I know you had a hard hour. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about before you go? Anything we didn't cover? Let me know.
No, I just like to say I hope everyone continues to support Danny with what he does, and I really appreciate the platform and being given the chance to explain my side of the story. And I hope people will continue to support Danny on YouTube as much as possible.
Thanks so much. Make sure you follow Lowkey on Twitter. That's where you can find all of his work. He's also on Mint Press News, where he hosts the Watchdog. So definitely follow Mint Press News. Just find them on YouTube. You can also find them through his Twitter. With that said, Lowkey, thanks so much for joining. We'll have you back on again very soon. You always have a platform here, especially given that your music, your work overall has been so inspirational to many. I know it has been to me. And also, happy birthday. happy belated birthday. Thanks for spending time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, man.
Take care.
All right. Have a good rest. Take care. All right. So everybody stick around. I'm going to cover more than a few stories, probably at least 2, because there's a lot happening in the world. That was a great conversation with Lowkey. Do not leave this stream. Keep hitting the like button. For some reason, it's a quieter night. I don't usually go on at 7, but I wanted to be respectful to Lowkey's time. Make sure I got him on to talk about this story. Hit that like button, hit that notifications bell, hit that subscribe button if you're new here. If you are able to, please do support this channel, Patreon, Substack, and many more options. Patreon being the best, very generous for Lowkey to plug. But I have a couple stories I want to cover. Okay, I'm gonna try to actually get these sources all squared away because I'm a little. I try to get these together as fast as possible. I did not know I was going to stream today until until kind of late in the week. So let me try to get these sources up. Okay. Okay, here we go. So I want to talk about Russia. Russia's conducting tactical nuclear drills. I want to talk about the significance of that. There we go. Okay. And I want to talk about it, in the context, there is this lobbying happening between by the Biden administration, Antony Blinken of all people, the so-called diplomat, begging for the United States to get permission to strike Russian territory with U.S. weapons, which would be a red line for Russia. So we're going to talk about this, okay? And we'll also talk about the military drills that China has launched in the area, in the Taiwan Straits area, okay? So they're pretty massive. They're pretty big. They're important, especially with the way that the United States and Taiwan separatist faction are reacting to them. So that's what we're going to talk about. So just bear with me as I get these things together. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. You know what to do. Support this channel on Patreon if you're able. Let's see. I'm just trying to see how I'm going to organize all of this here. Okay. All right, let's see how this goes. Here we go. Secretary of State Antony Blinken of the United States is once again fulfilling his diplomatic duty, not to peace, not to negotiations, but fulfilling a duty to the United States' militarist aims against Russia. The United States, Blinken, is lobbying for permissions to use U.S. weapons on Russian territory to allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory with U.S. weapons. Here is the story, which was first reported in the New York Times, but this is from RT, which gives a bit of a more brief synopsis. The top U.S. diplomat wants Ukraine to be given permission to use American weapons beyond its borders. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is pushing the administration of Joe Biden to allow Ukraine to attack targets deep inside Russia with American weapons, says the New York Times, referring to unnamed officials. The ban, according to the White House, was imposed out of concern if U.S. arms were used inside what Washington acknowledges as Russian territory would trigger escalation and potentially World War III. Blinken has been advocating for scrapping the restriction after making a sobering visit to Kiev earlier this month, the newspaper said, citing insider sources. Ukrainian officials have claimed that being able to target Russian forces across the border with American weapons that being unable to target Russian forces with American weapons led to the failure of its troops to prevent recent Russian advances in Kharkov, which is actually completely and utter nonsense. If you watch some of those videos, let's say in the Volchansk area, you will see literally Russian troops just walking in. That doesn't have anything to do with weapons. That has to do with the fact that Ukraine did not have any of its defenses prepared. They're haphazardly prepared. It's likely to do, of course, weapons have some to do with it, but it's likely to do also with the fact that the Ukrainian army, the military, has been effectively destroyed in many cases. They are desperate for manpower. When you don't have manpower, how do you even set up defenses? So Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that the offensive in Kharkov is a response to months of Ukrainian artillery and drone attacks on Russia's Belgorod region, that a buffer zone is required to deprive Kiev of the capability to make such strikes. The New York Times said that Ukrainian weapons don't pack the power and speed of American weapons. So Kiev has launched a lobbying campaign on Capitol Hill to pressure the White House, and it's obviously working. A group of representatives signed a letter to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Monday calling for the Ukrainian request to be granted. You also have Senator McCall, Lindsey Graham. We can go on and on and on, but that's what's happening. Blinken, like the good diplomat he is advocating for these strikes. Now, here's friend of the show, Scott Ritter, talking about on Sputnik. He's talking about the consequences. What does this all mean from the perspective of Russia, and how dangerous really is this? Here we go.
What Tony Blinken is talking about is overtly authorizing Ukraine to carry out actions against quote unquote old Russia. But the United States has already green-lighted Ukraine to do this. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, has been working with Ukrainian intelligence and with Russian opposition forces to take the fight into old Russia. This is done under a specific U.S. law that allows for covert action, so it's non-reportable to the American people, and it doesn't have to be reported to a certain extent to the United States Congress. But it's taking place. Ukraine is already attacking critical energy facilities inside Russia, oil tanks, petroleum depots. This is taking place. It's just that it's not taking place with State Department or Department of Defense connivance. It's taking place with the assistance, the facilitation of the Central Intelligence Agency, a covert war. All Tony Blinken is now talking about is taking this covert war and making it an overt war. Why is he doing this? Domestic American politics. It will have no impact on the battlefield. But what it does is allow the Biden administration to posture itself as doing something discernible to address the Russian successes, the successful offensive in north of Kharkov, the continuing successful offensives in eastern Ukraine and in Novorossiya. This is a political problem for the Biden administration. Anthony Blinken's trying to come up with a political solution, but it's short-sighted. It won't resolve the military problems that are being confronted by the Ukrainians. What it will do is create the dangerous potential for the kind of escalation that the Biden administration has been assiduously seeking to avoid. Escalation that would lead to a direct confrontation between Russia, the United States, and NATO. An escalation that could see this conflict move away from conventional war into the possibility, indeed probability, of nuclear conflict.
So that's Scott Ritter. That is, I mean, that is the ultimate consequence here, is that this conflict in Ukraine is moving into a kind of nuclear dimension. That was the fear from the very beginning for those who had genuine concerns about what NATO and what Ukraine was doing for many, many years, moving up along the border, flirting with NATO membership, training Ukrainian forces for this kind of war, which Russia felt it needed to wage in order to liberate Donbass and, of course, to protect its own sovereignty in the process. But the consequences are already bearing fruit. While this has, I agree with Scott, this has no bearing on what happens on the battlefield, it does have bearing on what happens in the war overall. Earlier in May, we had Russia declare that it was going to begin nuclear drills with its tactical nuclear weapons in response already to a flurry of threats, especially from France, talking about NATO troops going to Ukraine. But early in May, there was already a Russian response in the nuclear direction, because it has acknowledged, and as you'll see here, the Russia's defense ministry is openly stating that these drills are in direct response to these kind of provocations, which Blinken is trying to push forward at the official level. Here we go.
Has ordered exercises using non-strategic nuclear weapons in the face of provocative statements and threats by Western officials. The Russian Defense Ministry says the General Staff has begun preparations for the drills, and they soon will be held, involving the aerospace and naval forces.
During the drills, a set of measures will be carried out to practice issues of preparation and use of non-strategic nuclear weapons. The exercise is aimed at maintaining the readiness of personnel and equipment of units of combat use of non-strategic nuclear weapons for response, and to unconditionally ensure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Russian state in response to provocative statements and threats by certain Western officials against Russia.
So I just wanted to play that because that was earlier in May. Now, these drills have started. Okay, so they said the drills would occur sometime in the future. That future is now. So here is a video of those drills starting. And I'm just going to put this on so you can see. Okay, so there you see Russia preparing the way. So there you have it. They're preparing. Russia is preparing as we speak on this nuclear issue. And so, with that said, it is also important to note that not only is Russia preparing, but its number one ally, a legitimate ally, its number one friend in the world right now, especially in this growing multipolar world, China, supports these drills. Okay. So not only has Russia been preparing and is preparing now for nuclear war, given what people like Blinken are doing, given what Macron keeps on talking about, regardless of whatever you think about, well, are these just empty threats? This won't really change anything. Russia has known that the overall sum of US and NATO policy toward it is heading in this direction. And here we have a key report in China's Global Times, talking about how, and these experts are actually military experts in China, talking about how that these are aimed at effective deterrence against NATO. And here's what they had to say. Russia's forces launched the first stage of tactical nuclear drills. This was earlier May. This was May 21st, which serves as a response to some provocative statements made by Western officials, according to Russian media. Some Chinese experts said on Wednesday the purpose of the drills is not actual combat for effective deterrence, ensuring the U.S. and NATO do not act impulsively. The drills will involve delivery of nuclear weapons to troops from storage sites, arming tactical nuclear missiles, and preparing missile launches. The troops will use Iskander-M systems, which can fire 9 M7231 ballistic missiles or 9 M728 cruise missiles, both of which can carry tactical nuclear warheads with yields of about 5 to 50 kilotons. The exercise will also involve nuclear arming of air-launched missiles, including state-of-the-art hypersonic Kinjal. The Kh-47M2 Kinjal missiles and the Kh-32 cruise missiles are delivered by Russian bombers capable of carrying warheads similar to those mounted on Iskander projectiles. During the drills, Russian aircraft are to fly on patrol missions armed with these missiles. Russia decided in early May to hold tactical nuclear weapons drills in response to NATO countries' remarks about potentially sending troops to Ukraine, according to media reports. French President Emmanuel Macron said earlier that Western troops to Ukraine cannot be ruled out, and British Foreign Secretary David Cameron suggested Ukraine has the right to use UK-supplied weapons to strike targets on Russian territory. Again, this is over and over and over again. So you have Cameron, you have Macron, and now you have Blinken. Meanwhile, lawmakers in the House of Representatives passed the bill. So here we have the military experts. Tactical nuclear drills are mainly aimed at NATO and do not have direct connection with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The U.S. and NATO member states have already hinted at the possibility of military intervention to some extent, said Wei Dongshu, a Beijing-based military expert and media commentator. Russia's tactical nuclear exercises are mainly to demonstrate strength and power, such as rapid deployment, capability of tactical nuclear weapons, as the U.S.-led NATO military alliance is currently exerting tremendous pressure on Russia. Moreover, the U.S. has been engaging in nuclear activities, including conducting subcritical nuclear tests and continuously demonstrating its nuclear capabilities within the framework of NATO exercises. Therefore, Russia needs to be prepared at the tactical nuclear weapons level to deter and counterbalance NATO. So there you have it, China, right? They're saying that this is necessary. There is no rejection here. There's no condemnation. China is a huge proponent of denuclearization, a huge proponent. But here you have China openly saying through its media that this is justified. What Blinken, what Cameron, what Macron, what they're all doing is playing with fire around nuclear war. Now, if you don't understand Russia's perspective and you live in the collective West, that is no surprise. If you don't agree with Russia's perspective, of course, that's a political disagreement. And what can we say about that? But at the same time, we have to understand that if you're not placing emphasis on what the United States and NATO are doing and constantly saying, oh, you're just whatabouting Russia's behavior, then you're not really paying attention. Just look at this. And then these are the people that Russia are incredibly concerned about. These are the people driving U.S. foreign policy. Here you have in the Hill on the national security section an op-ed by Jonathan Sweet and Mark Toth, who Mark Toth is his partner in crime and writing. Jonathan Sweet is the real kind of person we should be paying attention to in a report like this. Biden is losing World War III, it says. I just want to read before I tell you who Mr. Sweet is, what it says, because this is exactly what Russia is very concerned about. Okay, they're concerned about the fact that the United States and NATO do not have the restraint necessary to prevent a nuclear conflict from coming out. They will be the ones to drive this. So Russia is preparing. So here is what it says. Joe Biden has become the James Buchanan of the 21st century. Buchanan, widely considered the history's worst president, sought to mollify everyone, yet in the end pleased no one. Under his rule, the United States drifted closer to secession and civil war. More than a century and a half later, the world is devolving into a global ideological World War III. Russia, China, and their proxies are actively attacking U.S. interests. Yet Biden's national security strategy remains rooted in fighting something less than two simultaneous and overlapping major conflicts, according to the Congress Research Service report in January entitled Great Power Competition Implications for Defense. The report notes that in 2018, the Trump administration was confronted with an Obama-era decision of building a force not around the demands of two regional conflicts with rogue states, but around requirements of winning high-intensity conflict with a single top-tier competitor, a war with China over Taiwan, for instance, or a clash with Russia in the Baltic region. But in reality, our nation is being confronted with three wars: the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and the looming war over Taiwan in the South China Sea. Make that 3.5 wars if you include Africa and the Sahel, as U.S. forces abandoned Niger. So it gets better. Seemingly caught in a vice grip of the November electoral calculus, Biden is refusing to even acknowledge we're already in World War III, let alone take necessary measures to win it. As a result, our nation's military, weapons, munitions, production capacity, and its ability to engage with the cyber warfare and disinformation emanating from Moscow and Beijing are all woefully lacking. All require an immediate remedy. We're in World War III already, and we have to remedy. The United States has to remedy all of its lack of capacity. This is what is being spread. This is what Blinken is adhering to. This idea that it is time to confront Russia, China, and Iran, because that's what they're talking about in West Asia and the Middle East. They're talking about the axis of resistance. They're talking about Iran that as the kind of the chief, the head of the axis of resistance force. So there you have it. You have World War III being actively declared. So why wouldn't Russia be preparing at this nuclear level to deter such a thing from happening? Because as big nations like Russia, like China have learned, these weapons are necessary for deterrence at all levels. But I want to now show you who Mr. Sweet is, okay, the author of this. I'm going to pull up his LinkedIn. Oh, is it not letting me? Hold on one second, okay? I need to pull up his LinkedIn if it will let me. Okay, here we go. All right, it's making me. Okay, so I'm going in to LinkedIn now. This is annoying. All right, it's not letting me go into LinkedIn. Sorry, guys. So let's go. Okay. This is very funny. They're blocking me from going in altogether. So here we go. We're going to Jonathan Sweet's LinkedIn. Let's see who he is. Okay. This is very interesting stuff. John Sweet. He's a freelance contributor and columnist for New York Post, Washington Examiner, Kiev Post, and Fox News. So he's a hard right neocon. But here is his resume. Okay. So here we go. I'm just gonna so now, okay, he's just working as an author. But if we go back, okay, let's go to all of his 22 experiences. He's been around the revolving door. So, of course, he spent a lot of time consulting intelligence. He was in the U.S. Africa Command for a year, a part of the Combined Joint Task Force. A big role for him under Obama was ahead of the Chief of Staff of the Intelligence Director at the U.S. European Command. But let's go down now because he was a big part of the Obama administration's as well apparatus. But here is where it gets. You'll always be able to find an Iraq connection with these neocons. Okay, so here he was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and then Mosul, Iraq, as Chief Analysis and Control Element in the U.S. Army 101 Airborne Division, providing intelligence, operations, exercises, contingency planning through collection management. Led 67 soldiers in the performance of intelligence, preparation on the battlefield, target development, battle damage assessment, battlefield visualizations, indications and warnings, and support to force protection. So, and then before that, he was in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Okay, so he's been around the NATO bloc. He's been around the Iraq war bloc. This is a very typical resume of a neocon militarist, now turned essentially consultant, think tanker, and author, often writing about matters of war, promoting war. And so there you have it. He is writing directly to us, saying it is time to prepare for not only prepare for World War III, but to just to get started because we're already in it. So if people like this who have a huge amount of influence, let's be honest, people like Jonathan Sweet have a huge amount of influence on what the military apparatus does. They work for the revolving door. They're constantly moving from consulting to being directly within the military intelligence apparatus to then, of course, as people like Lloyd Austin can attest, to boardrooms and to prominent positions in defense industries. So that is who is driving all of this against Russia. And now you have Antony Blinken being the good pet servant that he has been to these very kinds of voices, is now calling for something that when Macron and when David Cameron say things like this, they distance themselves from it. Now, because the situation in Kharkov is so bad for Ukraine, now because it is quite obvious that what Kharkov is a representation of is not just that Ukraine is in a bad position now, it's that the position isn't going to improve. Ukraine is not going to be able to come up with thousands of forces in a shorter period of time to correct the situation. The weapons will likely not get used. These restrictions, they say, are hampering things. But the reality is Ukraine has been hitting Belgrade for many months now, hitting civilian targets. That's already been happening. And the United States has been looking away or pretending to disapprove, even if they've even gone that far. So the point here is that World War III is already being actively prepared for, and you have forces in the military, foreign policy, neocon establishment calling for the United States to realize that World War III is already here. So why shouldn't Russia be preparing at this level, these new tactical nuclear drills, in order to show NATO, show the United States that when you play with fire, you will get burned. You will get burned. If you mess around, if you F around, then you will eventually find out what the consequences are. That these bombs, that these weapons that Russia has cultivated over the many years, dating back to the Soviet period, when it was a necessity to arm to have nuclear arms, given the dangers of a massive confrontation with the United States during the Cold War. This is the reality of the world that we live in. So it is time to buckle up, because people like Antony Blinken, they still have 6 more months and 5 more months or so in office. They are preparing the unthinkable, not because it's going to happen necessarily under Biden or whoever replaces him if he doesn't win, Trump, but because the overall trajectory is heading in that direction. And if we are to be quite honest, people like Jonathan Sweet, while it may not be official policy per se to say we're in World War III and it's time to get going, nonetheless, U.S. foreign policy as a whole, no matter who is running it, no matter what ideological persuasion they have, the overall goal is to contain, weaken, and destroy Russia. At least that is one of the goals. So Putin is aware. Russia is for damn sure aware. And the potential for a nuclear conflict has never been closer. Okay, everybody. That's the first story. All right. Then I'm going to get to the next one. I'm going to cover the Taiwan-China military drills that China is right now. Actually, as we speak, I believe they are engaged in these drills. So, yes, I saw some people who want to support. If you want to support on Buy Me a Coffee, that is great. If you want to subscribe on Patreon, that is great. We have a subscriber already who I'll shout all you guys out in the end for those who've given super chats and all that. If you want to become a YouTube member, I keep forgetting about YouTube membership, but I shouldn't, because I've so many amazing YouTube members probably in the audience. So, you can support on YouTube as well, $3.99 per month. It's not much. All the support is just to go to this channel, go to the labor, go to the costs to this. And then you do get some perks. You get early notifications. You do get the ability to communicate with me. And, there are some ways you can get involved in the work that I do, because I really do enjoy your insights, and I do try to listen to what the audience has to offer, because if you're here, then you definitely have something to offer. So with all that said, we are going to talk about now the China-Taiwan drills. This is something that I'm not surprised about. We are just a couple of days out of the election of Lai Ching-te, and he's a separatist. And we had the Biden administration send a bipartisan delegation. Now, this delegation did not include current officials, but nonetheless, China already knows where the U.S. stands. It's already sent, whether it's the Pelosi August 2022 debacle, or is that August 2023? I'm getting my dates mixed up. I think that was August 20. Yes, that was no, it was 2022. I was correct. The August 2022 debacle, where she went to Taiwan under Biden. And then there was the McCarthy visit in November of last year, where McCarthy was visited by Tsai Ing-wen, the former president of Taiwan. And all of that showed China where the United States is on the one China principle and policy, which is nowhere. It is done with it, essentially. And that's why there is the ever emanating threat of war with the United States. So I just want to pull up all the sources before I get officially started here, okay? Because this is, you're going to want to hear this. Here we go. Okay. Where are we? Where are we? Why do I have so many links? Is it all the same thing? Okay. Here we go. Okay. All right, here we go. China has launched its biggest military drills, its biggest military operation surrounding Taiwan since the provocations of the United States and, of course, of Taiwan separatists have reached a fever pitch over the last several years. Operation Joint Sword 2024 is what it is called. And here is the New York Times. I'm just going to show you the various perspectives on this. You have the New York Times talking about China launching military drills around Taiwan as punishment. China said the sea and air drills were meant as a stern warning to its opponents after Taiwan's new president asserted the island's sovereignty in defiance of Beijing. So here is just a quick photo. This is actually all accurate. So normally I'm like, oh, well, they're talking about punishment. That's an exaggeration. Or maybe they're even taking that completely out of context or lying altogether. No, China is directly saying this is punishment to the separatists and, of course, their backers in the U.S. for their ultimate so-called defiance. But really, all it is, it's provocations toward war, toward a red line that China will not allow to be crossed. So here you have the current exercise area everywhere. This was the big controversy, was that the operations also include the islands of Matsu, Kinmen, Wuchu islands, because those islands are not only under so-called Taiwan Authority jurisdiction, but in the case of Kinmen, there are literally Green Beret forces training on them. So you have these islands also being surrounded by Chinese military installations by air, by ship. So here is the photo of the essentially what they're doing is blockading the island. So there you have the New York Times report, but I want to play you now Taiwan media, how they are reporting the situation. And it's so funny because Taiwan's media apparatus, Taiwan News, one of their Taiwan Plus News, one of their media outlets, look at who's reporting for them in Taiwan. I mean, if there's anything that screams separatism more than listening to an Anglo-European talk about these military drills from Taiwan, I don't know what else does. So here we go.
Now, Taiwan's defense ministry has just held a press conference on the Chinese drills around Taiwan. Reese has been monitoring that for us in Taipei. Reese, what's the ministry saying?
Well, they're reporting more than 40 Chinese warplanes around Taiwan, 15 Navy ships, and 16 Coast Guard. That's the most that we've seen in almost a year, and basically amounts to a simulated blockade of Taiwan, though we're yet to see any live firing. Now, there are many comparisons being drawn between these current exercises and to those back in April 2023. That was when China reacted to then Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen going to California to meet with then U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The drills even have the same name, the Joint Sword drills. But at the heart of all of this, really, it's China practicing cutting off Taiwan from the rest of the world and simulating blockades. Many of the drill zones are close to Taiwan's major ports and airfields and to key waterways. Now, those could be used by countries like Japan and the US trying to provide aid to Taiwan in the event of a conflict. Now, in the 12 months since those blockades, we've seen China having amphibious assaults and counter-intervention operations, practicing those. China spends more than 12 times as much as Taiwan on its military and boasts the largest navy in the world. Going back slightly further to 2022, when then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, China's drill zones during those exercises actually crossed Taiwan's territorial borders. That's something that we haven't seen with these current exercises, but only half a day into these two-day programs, and with the drills being ominously named Joint Sword 2024A, there are real concerns that this could be just the beginning of a series of large-scale events.
Yeah, it is just the beginning, because the United States and the Taiwan separatists are crossing a red line that China has over and over and over again said is a red line, violating agreements, violating China's sovereignty, and not allowing for the Chinese people on both sides of the straits to resolve their differences without U.S. interference. So for sure, with Lai Ching-te making huge assertions of being independent from China, with the United States constantly talking about this as well. You read anything in the Western mainstream media, you hear Joe Biden's mouth go off on this, and you will hear over and over again insinuations of Taiwan's independence. That's a red line, not to mention the United States also being militarily involved, sending warships, naval ships constantly through the straits. But I want to show you what China had to say about it. So here's the Global Times. And yes, indeed, the PLA is holding these joint drills surrounding Taiwan to punish secessionist forces, outlying islands, including an exercise to deter secessionist forces. So here is from the PLA itself, the graphic of, this is from Weibo. You can see the Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army holds Joint Sword 2024 in Taiwan Straits, the north, south, and east of the Taiwan Island, as well as around islands of Kinmen, Matsu, Wushu, and Dongyin. So here you have the area being surrounded, plus the island. So this is a huge, I mean, that's a huge statement to include Kinmen, Matsu, and these islands, because they're so close. They're just kilometers from, just several kilometers from the mainland, of China. So it is a big deal that they decided to do this. Here you have a short video. I can play a little bit of it. I'm going to turn the music off because oftentimes there's copyright for some reason with the music. So here you have basically the preparations for the drills. Okay. This is China showing its strength here. Okay. It has a modern military. It does spend money on its military because just as the United States constantly says it has threats, China actually does have threats to its national security, not least being surrounded militarily by the United States. So this is China showing off what it can do. All right. As they prepare to surround and basically create a de facto embargo militarily of Taiwan completely, which would bring down Taiwan's internal economy, its so-called domestic economy, and make it so that any potential for Taiwan so-called independence is completely and utterly just asphyxiated and suffocated from the outset. You might say, wow, Danny, that's harsh. Why would China do this? That is absolutely warmongering. Well, actually not, because if Taiwan were to declare independence, quote unquote, it would be a violation of everything the US and China has agreed upon. And also, it would directly challenge China's legitimacy as one nation represented at the United Nations. Taiwan is not a nation. Taiwan is an island that has for thousands of years seen itself as part of China, even the so-called government in exile, the Republic of China, which is and is still what Taiwan's authority government is called. The Republic of China and its main party for many years, the KMT, believe themselves to be the government of all of China. So if there's independence sown there, if the United States is allowed to get its hands completely onto Taiwan, then China's national security is indeed under threat. So I want to show you now just what, another video detailing. This is from April, okay? These drills happened in April of 2023 after the meeting between Mr. Kevin McCarthy, who was Speaker of the House at the time, with Tsai Ing-wen in, I believe it was in California. And here are the drills. I'm just going to show a few minutes of the drills that were held. So the reason why I'm showing you some of this is because it's very similar to what is happening. As Taiwan Plus News said, it's very similar to what is happening right now. So we're just gonna stop there because there's no translation of what he is saying. But that's just a little taste of what's going on. And then let's finish what China is saying about these current drills. They say the Chinese People's Liberation Army on Thursday morning launched a military exercise surrounding the island of Taiwan in a move aiming to punish Taiwan independent secessionist forces and to send a warning to external interference forces following Taiwan regional leader Lai Ching-te's separatist inaugural speech on May 20th. Designed to surround the island of Taiwan from both east and the west, the exercises display the PLA's strike capability across all directions of the island without any blind spots, forming a situation where the island is pinned down from both sides. The PLA Eastern Theater Command started joint military drills surrounding the island of Taiwan from 7:45 a.m. Thursday, May 23rd, the Theater Command said in a press release early on the day. The drills are being conducted in the Taiwan Straits, the north-southeast of the Taiwan island, as well as areas around the islands of Kinmen, Matsu, Wushu, and Dongyin. The Theater Command said, attaching a map depicting time exercise zones surrounding Taiwan Island. Captain Li Shi, senior captain, spokesperson for the People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command, said that military services, including Army, Navy, Air Force, and Rocket Force of the Theater Command, are being organized to conduct the joint drills, codenamed Joint Sword 2024A, from May 23rd to May 24th. So here you have the overall what it looks like as we saw already. The drills focus on joint sea air combat readiness patrols, joint seizures of comprehensive battlefield control, joint precision strikes on key targets, Lee said. Adding exercises involve the patrol of vessels and planes, closing in on areas around the island of Taiwan, and integrated operations inside and outside the island chain to test the real joint combat capabilities of the command's forces. So this is bad news for the United States because, the United States is preparing for a war with China on the first island chain. And China is showing that it is quite prepared to mobilize very fast in a matter of days to test out its capabilities. That's something the United States cannot do. You will never see a military operation, even in the South China Sea or wherever the United States is, that can be done so rapidly. Most of the exercises the United States coordinates with the squad or the quad or whatever it is, those exercises are scheduled far in advance and take a lot of preparation before they can even be launched. So even just on the readiness aspect of this, it's bad news for the United States. Lee said the drills serve as strong punishment for the separatist acts of Taiwan independence forces and a stern warning against interference and provocation by external forces. The exercises by the PLA came after Lai, the new regional leader on the island of Taiwan, made an inaugural speech on Monday in which he stubbornly adhered to Taiwan independence, loudly propagated the fallacy of secession, incited confrontation and antagonism across the Taiwan Straits, and expressed his intention to rely on external force to seek independence and seek independence by force. Quote, rely on external forces to seek independence, end quote, to seek independence by force. Since then, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's provocative visit to the island in August 2022, the PLA has organized several rounds of large-scale military exercises as countermeasures to provocations by Taiwan independent secessionists and their collusions with external forces, in addition to holding regular patrols and training exercises in the region. Spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Wang Wanbin, said at a routine press conference on Thursday that the joint exercises safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity, forcefully punish Taiwan independent secessionist forces' separatist moves, and firmly warn against interference and provocations by external forces, and fully conform to international law and practices, and are completely rightful and necessary. So we can stop there, because the key theme here is punishment. Now, this is while this isn't the first time that China has decried what Taiwan is doing, what separatist forces in Taiwan is doing, what the United States is doing, it certainly is the first time I've seen the words punish come out of the foreign ministry, out of the top brass of China's People Liberation Army. Indeed, the very inclination of punishment means that China is taking a firmer and firmer stance on this question, especially in lieu of what is happening in Ukraine, especially in lieu of the volatile political headwinds that constantly plague the United States. The United States is not a predictable force. It could be at any moment that the U.S. political and military brass decide it is time to jump charge the move toward Taiwan independence. Now, this is China's red line, and this is what China has been saying from the very beginning, that there is a red line with Taiwan, and that red line is there is to be no interference in the affairs of the Chinese people with regard to cross-straits issues. There is to be no attempts to influence and to shape the political future of the island of Taiwan that goes against the very basis of international law, which says that interfering in the political and military processes of other countries is an act of war. Really, China has been incredibly restrained in this regard. When we think about this, just think about the reality of Taiwan. How many billions upon billions of US dollars worth of weapons alone have gone to Taiwan? We are talking about a backlog of over $15 billion worth of US weapons and constant renewals and additions in the millions of dollars, which add to this backlog of promises of things like F-16s and major military equipment to the island. That alone is incredibly provocative, given Taiwan's, not just Taiwan's position vis-a-vis China. It would be provocative if Taiwan was an independent country. Let's just say Taiwan was an independent country forever. It never was, never will be. But let's say it was. It would still be incredibly provocative for the United States to essentially point its weaponry, its military apparatus toward China. Now, it's even worse than that China is having its sovereignty violated all along this process with the United States' constant militarization and interference in the political affairs of Taiwan. The United States has made it absolutely clear that its support for Lai Ching-te and the DPP is essentially ironclad in the sense that the United States has gambled all of its political resources in the DPP's separatist political agenda, and that it sees this political agenda as incredibly helpful toward realizing various aims, whether it is militarizing the island as a kind of unsinkable aircraft carrier for a future war with China, or whether it's the economic side, which is a big part of this, attempting to isolate and maneuver Taiwan's high-tech economy, especially in the realm of semiconductors, away from any kind of mainland relationships, which is ridiculous because without the mainland, Taiwan's economy would not exist. It would be in complete shambles. But also to navigate Taiwan's economy, not just away from China, but toward the United States, so that the United States can attempt to leverage its tech war on the People's Republic of China without consequences. That's a big part of maneuvering Taiwan politically, is to try to shield the United States from the consequences of a larger tech war on China. Now, all of this is fantasy, right? This completely just undermines any kind of reality concept when it comes to economic supply chains. All right. And it's backfired already in the sense that China is moving more and more towards self-reliance. And every time I go to China, it's very clear that China's high-tech sector is not only by far and away more advanced than the United States, but that soon it will be producing things within the supply chain, for example, like the highest tech nanometer semiconductor chips needed to power the most advanced technological devices. It is quite clear that China is going to get there in large part because of these sanctions. So you have the United States right now clamoring about overcapacity, clamoring about China's economy. It's the main issue. China has to be contained, and it is moving more and more in an escalatory and aggressive direction when it comes to Taiwan. It is parking its special forces, its Green Berets, right off the coast of China. It is sailing its warships through the Taiwan Straits. It is sending its weapons into Taiwan. It is training Taiwan so-called military forces to wage a war with China. And it is interfering politically in Taiwan's affairs in order to sow the poison seeds of anti-China sentiment, to sow the seeds of pro-independence sentiment, so that the political conditions in the island reflect U.S. interests. Essentially, the United States is already at war with China, and these drills are China's message to the United States, to the U.S. military, and the rest of the foreign policy establishment that China not only knows this, but China is very much prepared to combat it, and it has every right to do so. Every right to do so. We don't like war here on this channel. We are not a pro-war channel. We don't want to see Russia in a kinetic conflict in Ukraine with Ukraine because of what NATO is doing. We don't want to see China have to militarily intervene in the affairs of Taiwan in order to reunify the island. But it is the United States, and of course NATO right behind it, and its various allies, its separatist forces on the island of Taiwan, which are building toward this scenario. How easy it would be for the United States to just peer at its own joint communiques with China. How easy would it be for the DPP, the ruling party, to put the interests of Taiwan as an island that has an economy, that has people who have futures, to say it is time to build bridges, it is time to prioritize development, it is time to integrate the Chinese nation how easy it would be for all of those things to happen at a hypothetical level, and reasonable people would likely say, well, that sounds like not such a bad idea. But Cold War hawks, hysterics, they are ruling the day here. The neocons, they don't want to see reunification. They don't want to see prosperity across the straits. They don't want to see peace, because that would only strengthen China. And China is the boogeyman. China is the threat of a good example. China is the existential threat, crisis befalling the US empire. China is the big nightmare for a hegemon that is seeing its legitimacy and its influence around the world wane. And China doesn't even have to do anything about that. That is happening on its own. Just check out the meme all over X and other social media outlets of Xi Jinping sitting back and saying that, just watching, the CIA, the CIA is talking about Xi Jinping's plot of just watching the American empire burn. That is what is happening. And so Taiwan is this huge chip, this huge chess piece for the US military, this critical location for US military interests and plans for China, that it is moving the United States into another unthinkable scenario. And China, through these drills, Joint Sword 2024, is saying, well, fuck around and find out, mess around and find out. You will find out that this is not the conflict that you wanted all along, that this will end in complete disaster. What China is doing is not about war. It's about deterrence. It's about peace. It's about reunifying Taiwan, not by military means, but by keeping peaceful means open through showing the United States, showing Taiwan separatists that their aims will lead to their destruction. That if they attempt to realize their aims, that it will be their destruction. So, will they heed this stern warning? Will they heed China's message that true punishment is indeed possible if they want it and if they seek it? Well, we will have to see. Some people are more confident than I am in the restraint of the United States and the separatist forces and the various agents of chaos that the United States likes to support. But overall, it is important to note that the direction, the goal, and the overall objective and policy is war with China. And China is very much prepared to defend itself from this scenario. All right, everybody, that is the second story, and I think we're going to end with two stories tonight. All right. So here we go. I am going to now, we can have some fun. Actually want to check on I'm a Celtics fan. I want to see what they're doing. Okay, all right, they're doing good. All right, guys. It was a little bit quieter of a night. YouTube has been very interesting. I'm always on the verge of like this burnout scenario, where I'm always on the cusp of burnout when it comes to what we do here. But I have a big break coming up. So I'll tell you first announcements. Okay, announcements. I'll tell you what I have in store. It is so I know it's like a holiday weekend in the United States. So I will not be streaming from about I might not be streaming. It's like a week. You won't see me probably for a full week live. Okay. But I do have on Friday the 31st of May, finally Saeed Mohammed Marandi, Dr. Saeed Mohammed Marandi is coming on the show. It took a long time. I learned, because I respect Saeed Mohammed Marandi this much, I was like, I need to find a way, because sanctions don't allow him to use the platform that I use. So I was like, I gotta find a way to get him on the show because I've watched him for literally years. I mean, he's just such a genuine guy. I mean, his segments on Piers Morgan, like incredible stuff, and I love his. I mean, I would like to think that I'm not as cool as he is, but I like to think that I have his kind of similar demeanor. But he will be on the show to talk about West Asia, the resistance. Okay, so we have some questions coming from Rumble. I want to respect Rumble people. I will. So yeah, so that's one thing. Okay. Actually, let me check something real quick because I just need to see. I think I have enough space. Sorry, StreamYard only allows a certain amount of storage, which is super annoying unless you pay more. So support the show, support the program, and that helps. Me continue to. Anyway, I'll have to figure this out later. Well, I kind of have to figure it out now. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Then I'm gonna. So he'll be on the show May 31st, probably in the mid-afternoon. Keep in touch by subscribing, hitting the notifications bell. Of course, I spread it all over social media, so he will be on likely 1 p.m. Eastern. But I gotta confirm the time with him. Okay. That's for sure. I'm just gonna download this and delete this. Okay, so that's for sure. So that's gonna happen. That's probably the last guest of May because I'm not able to do much for the rest of May. There'll be clips up, of course. I may do individually, maybe on Thursday if I can. But if I can't, it's likely just gonna be Friday. That stream with Mohammed Marandi. Then we start off June. I believe I have Mark Sloboda on the. Okay, no, I have Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on the 6th. I have Mark Sloboda on the 7th. I have tentatively Pepe Escobar on the 11th after a long trip from Russia. So those are mostly confirmed. The first two, Pepe Escobar, because it's so far away, and he only has a limited amount of time. So we're gonna try to get him on live on the 11th of June. So stay tuned, save those dates. Then I am gone for a much longer period. I am gone from June 13th through July 2nd. It's going to be an actual break. It's going to be a full 2.5 weeks. There'll be clips coming up, but I got to say it's likely not going to be as numerous as in the past because I think I need a legitimate break. But that's going to happen. And then July, who knows? July is kind of off and running. I know Scott Ritter, who's usually on the program, he'll be in Russia. I'm going to try to get him on to report out from Russia from his very unique trip. It's an incredible trip. See if we can work that out. Of course, it's all dependent on his schedule. And then, for the rest of July, who knows? I'm just going to take it by ear. I can't schedule that far in advance anyway. So we will continue though in July, and then August 25th, I believe it is, I'm back out to China. That should be great. It's going to be a very, 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 very it's going to be a very, very, very interesting trip. It's going to be a different kind of trip. I will be in Xinjiang in late August. Early September for part of that trip. It's going to be great. I'll definitely get video footage. I'm actually going to have help when I'm out there from a media organization. I'm not going to announce all the details just yet, but just know that that is happening. I'm actually trying to bring a friend with me, a personal friend, just to get her, who's having a rough time. And so just trying to get her to experience China. She'll be, I'll be working for some of it, but it's going to be a great trip. I'm trying to get more prominent interviews for this trip, something I haven't been able to get because I've been so busy on delegations. When I'm on delegations, it's hard to get the time to travel around China, sit down with someone, have a real robust conversation. So I'm hoping to have really good interviews while I'm out in China for my late August trip. All right. So those are the tentative plans, good announcements for those who were generous of were generous enough to stick around. You guys always get the first dibs on these kind of announcements. Now, all right. Now I want to give a let me just do this so I can win this stream. Okay, there we go. Now I've guaranteed that this stream I'll be able to make clips for it later. I wish I was going to BRICS for the meeting. No, I'm not going to Kazan. I wish. But I'm actually going to try to collaborate with DD Geopolitics because I know they're going to try to do some stuff around that. I don't know where they'll be, but I'll just be in the US. I won't be able to make that trip. I probably could if I pushed, but you know what? My life is about to, my personal circumstances are going to kind of get intense. Probably don't know if I'm moving. I don't know if I'm other personal things that I've got to pay attention to. So October, it's not going to be a travel time for me this year. I was in Vietnam this past October, but not to Kazan as much as I'll be covering it. I'm going to get guests who are in Kazan. There's going to be like everyone there. So I'm going to get people on this show while they're in Kazan. I'm going to make them, whether it's Pepe or whoever it is, if he's there, someone to report out, or Scott. I know Scott will be there if I can get him to report out from there if he's with anyone who will help him with such a thing. But in any event, jealous. I want to go to Kazan. Hell, I wanted to go to the Belt and Road Forum this year. I heard it actually wasn't that exciting, but I have friends who are at the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, and I was very jealous. I didn't get to go, but all in due time, it'll all happen eventually. Let me give shout outs, okay? Let me give shout outs before I head out of here, okay? Shout outs. Here we go. All right, this is just Chris who gave a couple of super chats. Thank you, Chris, for your super chats. Peace with China, peace with Russia, peace with Iran. Indeed, I support that message. Thanks for the super chats. I don't know why it's not. Okay, there we go. Now, I am going to shout out moderators here. We have David here. We have Ware. We have Desert Mantis, Creative Experiments. We have anyone else here? I don't know. Who else? No, I think that's enough. I mean, the chat wasn't so bustling today. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, I didn't get any questions. I want to also apologize to Valentina on Patreon. I wasn't able to ask your question yesterday with Scott Ritter. That is my bad. We just did not have enough time. So apologies to you because that is something I do offer to Patreon members. We do have a new Patreon member, Armando. Thanks so much for becoming a Patreon member, Armando. Not sure if you did that during my stream here with Lowkey and then me covering the other stories. Marsha Flower 15, should I give a shout out to Marsha Flower 15? Are you here for are you a moderator? Did I make you a moderator? I don't know. No. But you're I think you are a regular here. So in any event, other things. I didn't see any. I did see a question from a Rumble viewer. Someone asked, pulling the strings, asked about my China experience. I did do a pulling the strings. I did do a video. I haven't clipped it yet. I don't know if I will. I think I missed the ball. I always miss the ball on these things. because I just I don't have enough time to keep up. People get mad at me about video clips on my channel because I am someone who does live streams and then video clips, but they get mad because I often news stories change, developments change, but I often am just too busy to like get them all up before maybe they become a little bit outdated. I tend to think my analysis is usually always evergreen, but can't please everybody. But in any event, I did cover this, I believe, in one of the first streams back from the trip. And so I will talk about the trip, though. I'll just talk about it briefly just to give people a reminder. So yeah, I was in China again. This time I was in China from, I believe, I don't even remember the dates. This is how bad I am. Actually, I can check when I was there because it'll correspond with the big gap in live streams. It was in April. I believe it was from, yes, now I remember. So yeah, it was mid-April. It was, I believe I left sometime April 11th or 12th. I got back 10 days later. And it was a fascinating trip. Okay, so let me just talk about what I did. So in China, I started in Beijing, had many meetings. I went with the China NGO network. It's really a subsidiary of a larger organization called the Chinese Association for International Understanding. And it's a people-to-people organization. It's considered an NGO, but NGOs in China are heavily tied to the governments. They're public in that sense. And of course, they all fall under the auspices of the governmental department for international exchanges, which is the International Department of the Communist Party of China, because that is the governance system in China. So this trip was held by the Friends of Socialist China, a group led by a good friend, Carlos Martinez. He organized this delegation with many folks from mainly from the UK, but myself and Margaret Kimberley were from the United States. Margaret Kimberley of Black Agenda Report. And we traveled around many different regions of China, looking at China's modernization, talking to folks about China's development process, talking about the role of Marxism in China. I began in Beijing. We went to various meetings in Beijing, mainly. We went visited the Center for China in Globalization. We had meetings with, for example, the publisher, Contemporary World Press, which actually published my book in Chinese. It translated my book in Chinese, and you can actually see it up there. And so I was actually able to meet them, which was an incredible experience. And essentially, then we moved on to a province called or Zhejiang province, and we visited various cities there. Stayed at a party school, Communist Party of China party school, meaning that newer members are training there. We heard lectures by folks, professors who teach at this school. And it was a really interesting experience to be there, and also just to see the rich history, because Zhejiang province is the birthplace of the Communist Party of China. Actually, Zhejiang province is where the first Communist Party of China members, the founders of the Communist Party of China, fled to after they were busted by the French Quarter, by the police, the foreign police occupying China at the time in Shanghai. They took a boat. It's called the Red Boat, actually. And they fled to Zhejiang, and they finished the constitution, signed it, ratified it, and they became the Communist Party of China. So that's why it was so significant to go there. Then we went to Jilin province. And the reason why we went there, well, actually, we visited briefly a city called Xiping. Okay. I believe that's I don't know if that is in Zhejiang. We went many places. Okay, I'm even forgetting. Like we went to Hangzhou, which is a very wealthy city the richest city per capita GDP in China. So we saw things there. We saw how we went to a few tours of development. We went to a cooperative outside of Jilin province, an agricultural cooperative. And Jilin is bordering Russia and China. Russia and the DPRK. And Jilin is a hub for development now, was once one of the one of the poorest provinces of China, now is one of the most dynamic because of the role it has in developing new energy vehicles, renewable energy vehicles, and high-speed rail technology. So it is a hub of development. We went to the Provincial Communist Party of China building. We met with provincial officials there to talk about what's going on in Jilin. So we did a lot of travel. We went to a lot of So in Xiping, the city of Xiping, there is a huge monument. It's one of the heaviest areas with the heaviest fighting that occurred during the so-called Civil War, or really the war for liberation for New China. And some of the bloodiest battles were fought there. So we went to a museum dedicated to talking about that. So that's about the gist of the trip. Okay, it was a lot of learning about China's development process, seeing it firsthand through going to places like agricultural cooperatives, and we went to museums dedicated to China's first produced vehicles, and of course we had many meetings as well with the various folks at whether it was the party schools that we stayed at, or whether it was other organizations, NGOs, etc. So it was a trip officially to learn more about the Chinese economy. I definitely felt like I learned a lot more, especially about the role of Marxism. I was able to meet a fan at Jilin University School of Marxism, which was really interesting, and learn from them about what is the role of Marxism still in China, because it has a role. It has a role to play, regardless of what people think about that, how they think about that. It has a huge role in China's development right now. So that was the basis for the trip. And I heavily enjoyed it. I always like going back. I love the food in China is great, but the vibes in China are great. I just like being there because people are very confident. People are nice, but people are very direct. At least where I have gone. I mean, most of the time I've been in northern China, northeast China. This time I got a little. I mean, I've been to Shanghai, which is a different experience. Zhejiang is not necessarily, north necessarily. It's kind of moving south, but I the confidence of people, the directness, I really enjoy that kind of culture. There's no real people. It's just so funny that people have this idea of Chinese people in China as being some kind of like automatons and robots that don't have opinions of their own. They only parrot the government, and it's just like, you just have never been to China and talked to a Chinese person, because very direct, very much, they believe in what they believe in, and, but very friendly, generous, very interesting always to go. So I look forward to going back, because this next trip, I'm going to be going to Xinjiang. I'm going to be going to the, more remote areas, talking not just to people, but also to those, who have a stake in policy, whether it's in Xinjiang or the broader, Chinese nation. So I'm really looking forward to that. With that said, I think we got one more super chat. Thank you so much, Denise Marisi. Sorry, Denise Marguerite Marese. So I'm probably butchering that. When China exports, it's called overcapacity. When Western countries export, it's called free trade. Have a nice weekend. and Famil Danny. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's the truth of the matter. That's the truth of the matter. It is absolutely ridiculous to call what China is doing overcapacity. It's just trying to, again, it's just punishing China for doing well. That's all that we're seeing. We're seeing a concerted effort among the imperial core, amongst the empire, to punish China for doing well, for having a dynamic economy, for having one that also just subscribes to aims that the United States really refuses to acknowledge. You know, it refuses not just to acknowledge it, but it refuses to coexist with it. Right? It doesn't matter how integrated the United States and China are economically, especially on the U.S. side. The United States doesn't want to see a challenger. It doesn't want to see a country succeed in a way that offers something different. It doesn't want to coexist with China's overall vision for common prosperity, for poverty eradication, for the development of a world that's far more democratic than the one we have now via multipolarity. It doesn't want to see any of that. And it's too bad because it's happening. It's going to continue to happen. It's going to continue to occur. And the only thing the United States has left at its disposal is the nuclear button. But as we've been discussing here quite frequently, to pull that trigger is essentially a recipe for blowing yourself up. So we are in quite the situation here, guys. And so I want to leave you all now, okay, with that, because it's getting a bit late here. I've been on for a couple hours. So with that said, this was the last live stream probably for a little bit. Probably good to get the algorithm refreshed, hopefully. Expect clips on the channel. Okay, you can expect clips on the channel coming up while the Memorial Day weekend is occurring. And then I'll look at my schedule. Maybe I will be on twice next week when I come back if I'm able. I tend not to do so when my wife is available because got to be respectful of that space and time. But I want to actually just look at where I'm at in June and late May when we come back again. I believe it will be my only days. Yeah, my only days will be probably the 30th in the evening. If there's something that really needs to be covered, I will be on, or it'll just be saved for Mohammed Marandi. I will be working to confirm with him, and then we're into June. Okay, and I think June 1st might be a day. I also have. No, June 1st, I think I have the Left Forum. I'll probably be speaking at the Left Forum. I think that's Saturday. And then I may be going away again for a day or two that weekend. And then back. So the 4th, 5th, the week of June, 4th, 5th, 6th, the week of the 3rd of June will be an intense time. I'll be, having multiple guests, hopefully. And then, into a big long break, guys. Into a big long break. With that said, everybody, I'm going to leave here now. All right. Keep hitting that like button as you leave. But I'll see you all again pretty soon live. But keep hitting. So he's like, put up a Google Calendar. No, I'm not going to do it. All right, guys. Take good care. Really great to be with all of you tonight. Bye-bye.